Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in this evening. My name is Natalie Erazo, and I'm the coordinator of repertory and specialty film programs at BAM. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we're a multi-arts organization in Brooklyn, New York, and we put on programs across film, live performance, visual arts, humanities, and archives. We are really thrilled to be joined by filmmaker Andrew Ahn tonight, who will be speaking about his feature film debut, Spa Night, which had its New York premiere at BAM Cinema Fest in 2016, which is our annual showcase of American independent cinema. So thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Before we begin, I just wanted to go over a few community guidelines for the conversation. If you have a question, you may type it in the chat box to the right of this window, and we'll try our best to get to it within the last 20 minutes or so of the conversation. We have a zero tolerance policy for any hateful language, so if we detect anything along the lines of racism, sexism, homophobia, or xenophobia, and so forth, that will be cause for immediate cancellation of this conversation. If you purchased a physical ticket for the what would have been the live screening of this program, we encourage you to hold on to it for a future screening when our cinemas are able to reopen. And you may also donate it to BAM, which helps support our operational costs during this time. If you're interested in purchasing a membership or donating a membership to a friend or family, you may go on our website, bam.org, for more information. I think that just about covers all the house rules, and we're ready to begin. So Andrew, Spa Night was originally included in a series titled Programmer's Notebook on Solitude, which is a program in which all our programmers respond to a thought-provoking theme or key phrase. And in this case, solitude, we understood it from a place of not just relating to being alone or lonely or solitary, but more from a place of resilience and fortitude and the self-discovery that can come from spending time on your own. And as the health crisis unfolded and we decided to make this a virtual program, we found that it was even more resonant and I think relatable to a lot of us during this time. So I think something that you do really beautifully in Spa Night is sort of this construction of both personal and systemic solitude as that relates to David and his family. And I was wondering how you reflect on that theme and whether this was something that you were actively reckoning with as you were writing the script.
Yeah, it's a really like rich theme to explore. I think a lot of artists are really interested in solitude because I think so many of us create within that kind of environment. And there is something about the filmmaking process that like especially in the writing phase can feel very solitary, but I think that's what I really love about film is that it very quickly turns into like a very collaborative process, and there are so many people involved, producers, production designers, cinematographer, the actors. It really becomes something so much more, and so that I think that dichotomy is really fascinating. When I first, conceptualized Spa Night, it really was a journey of one's self-exploration. The very first draft of Spa Night actually all took place in the spa in one night and followed this, character, kind of the David prototype, through the spa and this kind of almost real life, like real time, experience, and is a little bit of a Goodbye Dragon Inn ripoff that I still actually kind of really would enjoy making. But my whole inspiration was that I had discovered that Korean spas in Los Angeles were a really popular space for gay men to hook up, and within this location was this intersection of identities that exists within me. And so, there was this desire to kind of find other entities, bodies, places that like also house these intersections. And so, I think there was this this feeling of just like, how do you reconcile these two things? How does someone, feel like a whole body, like a whole being? And so, I think that that's something that kind of has to be defined by the person living it. And that was also something that I felt not just on a kind of personal scale with that character David, but also kind of on a community scale. I was really interested in defining Koreatown, defining the Korean American community within itself, as opposed to in opposition to whiteness, And so I just remember early on, I had, potential executive producers say like, oh, like you should write a white character in it because it would say so much about this person and, this family. And I was like, I don't want to do that. And I realized that that's a challenge and that it can be a very useful like narrative tool in talking about, an immigrant family experience. But, I think that was the reason it was a challenge was the reason I wanted to make the film. And so I do really feel that theme of self-discovery, definition, like kind of in the making of the film, in the the character of the film, and then also the world of the film.
And I want to stick on that, what you said about this opposition to whiteness, which I find really brilliant in the film, and something that in reading some criticism on the film kind of frustrated me because there was this, like, I think, rejection of David's quiet, reticent nature and maybe like some stereotypes that come within from that characterization. And maybe I'm inserting myself too much in this because I'm also a quiet and reticent person by nature, but I'm seeing it as like sort of an act of refusal, because I think in many ways he is refusing either things that are imposed by him by society or his family and community. We see this refusal of him, rejecting this notion of, I think, internalized capitalism or like internalized overachievement. When he bails on his SAT classes, we see this in his rejection of heteronormativity that's imposed by his family members and even his friends that he goes out with. And then in the spa, there's a really interesting moment where he's also rejecting this role of policing fellow queer people that is mandated onto him. And so I'm seeing his quiet tenacity as a strength, as this like power. So I was wondering how you went about directing David in this process, and what was that process like?
Yeah, it was interesting. In the writing process, a lot of people thought David felt like too much of a cipher, and I agree with that to a certain extent. Especially in the screenplay format, and this is where I feel the kind of frustrations of I feel the frustrations of the screenplay as like a tool to make film. I think they're very different mediums, and so I felt like, okay, yeah, like that character might feel unsatisfying on the page, but I just had such a clear vision for him as a character cinematically, and so I knew that was the kind of challenge going into kind of casting and directing that role. And so when I like found the actor Joe Suh, who I think is so amazing and really like embodied that character like so beautifully. My goal was to never have him feel like a pathetic, like pitied character, like that wasn't the point for me. It was really important that character kind of move through the world and make choices like out of like a real kind of emotional maturity. um, and I think I think for me it was, I'm glad that you like that quiet tenacity like resonated with you, because I do think that there's something, there's something really like admirable about a character that is in some ways, just like letting the world like happen to him, but then knowing that that's not like forever, but just like a phase that he needs to kind of like understand, and allow him to kind of define himself, and then like we'll have more agency, and that's kind of how we got to the end of the film, the very end of Spa Night. The kind of secret of the ending is that we had actually had a different ending scripted and also shot. We had shot a different ending, and it didn't totally work. And when we were thinking about, what is this last image? What is this last moment that we want to leave the audience with? And it was just that David has agency, and that he can finally, make a move in the world that is his own, and so we had him run off screen, and that felt just like the clearest, way to define his personhood. And so I think that I think a lot of people, want to read David as like a weak character. I think that that's something that kind of very well-versed film audiences like might be expecting. But I also think that that leads to, characters that, like really champion capitalism or accepting heteronormativity. It's like, like David's going to reject all these things, in all different ways.
Yeah, and I mean, that agency is really powerful at the end. So if it wasn't that, if I may ask, what was that alternate ending?
Yeah, it's actually, I mean, it's so crazy. I will say that when I was writing the screenplay to Spa Night, I was just like so obsessed with the ending of In the Mood for Love. And I loved this kind of like very aggressive time jump, and, time has passed. And I had, scripted, and we shot this like scene where, like David is like driving a car and like listening to NPR, and then like goes to his grandma's grave and like does this bowing ceremony again. And, it was just, it doesn't make sense. Like it didn't really work. And we tried different configurations of that, and, but, in some ways, like I didn't want an audience to necessarily feel like they had the right to see what David does, like how he grows up. I felt like that really, belonged to him as a character. And so, this new ending that like kind of happens just, soon after the kind of events of the film, like, it just made sense that he goes back to running, but that it gains a new meaning.
Yeah. I wanted to shift a little bit towards more of the visual aesthetics and the technical aspects of the film.
Yeah.
So I noticed that you, and this is something you also do in your recent film Driveways, is you tend to dwell on the minutia of everyday life. And I'm seeing this in close-ups of hands, close-ups of, skin touching, even glances that are exchanged between people. And everything is always told from the interiority of David. Even the his very climactic intimacy scene in the spa is still always focused on him. You don't see his partner's face. And so I think this is something pretty characteristic of if I may say, of queerness and queer coming of age, this like yearning for something that maybe isn't immediately attainable or is even forbidden in your mind, you know? And so I'm wondering how you went about in developing that visual language that is a little bit more sensual as opposed to something that might be read as pornographic, especially when you're working with nude bodies in a spa.
Yeah, it was, it was really interesting thinking about the visual language for the film. It really was a collaboration between myself and my cinematographer, Ki-jin Kim, who shot Spa Night and also shot my second feature, Driveways. Um, you know, what Ki-jin and I really took into the production of Spa Night, thinking about was this kind of thesis statement of visual yearning, and that we wanted the camera to kind of desire in the way that David desires other men's bodies, desires a future, desires, like clarity of self. And so we kind of took that thesis statement and it kind of became certain visual choices where framing became really important, where we were trying to think about like what's out of the frame, what's off screen. It was something that Ki-jin did really beautifully with the lighting and just what's in the darkness that you really want to see that we're not quite showing you. In the spa, all the steam, that was something that we really played with. And I agree with you. There is something like very queer about it, and a lot of the references that we we're using, visual references that Ki-jin and I talked about were, like queer artists, queer painters, queer photographers. I really love this Japanese photographer, Eiki Mori. And so we were really, I think there is something about a queer point of view, a queer gaze that, really talks about yearning in a really interesting way.
Yeah, and just to go a little bit deeper, I mean, you mentioned a few references, but was there any particular film? You mentioned The Mood for Love in terms of like the theme that inspired you. Was there anything visual that you were directly drawing inspiration from? And, because I know there was also Dole, First Birthday, your short that was very much inserted in this film that also had like similar inspirations, I can imagine. And then just an announcement for the audience. If anyone has questions, please do type that in the chat box because we're going to turn over to you all soon.
Film references, it's interesting that I mentioned In the Mood for Love because I do like love that movie intensely, but it's also like so different from Spotlight in many ways. Like I watch that movie and I'm like, oh, like Wong Kar-wai is doing things that I could never do and I would never do well. I think I'm such a fan of Ozu, and I love Tokyo Story and Late Spring are two of my favorite films, and the kind of quiet the quiet family drama nature of his work is like very inspirational to me, and what I love about his kind of cinematic approach is that it's a very strong approach, but it also can feel very humble and to a certain extent invisible to the drama. You just get swept up in these characters and in their lives, and so to kind of go back to something that you had mentioned earlier about these like quiet observational moments, like I think for me, when I think about like my favorite moments in Spa Night, they are these very like small like realizations small observations that lead to big realizations or big emotions, that it can feel very like um, uh, kind of humble in scale, but is very like emotionally resonant and big. And so, it's like, I think one of my favorite scenes in Spa Night is the scene where David comes back home from like this whole USC adventure, and he sees his dad sleeping with a toothpick in his mouth, and he pulls it out. And that to me is, it kind of gets to why I want to be a filmmaker, which is, it's being a filmmaker for me kind of feels like when you're out in the world and you see something happen and you realize that other people didn't see that, and so you're like, oh my god, like, did you just see that? And so often these things that are overlooked by other people are like these smaller moments, and so those are the moments that I want to be able to like put a magnifying glass to, like show bigger, show that they're important, to an audience that might overlook it in their everyday life.
Yeah, that toothpick scene is so tender. And as I was rewatching it the other day with my roommate, we were both like, the toothpick in his mouth. And, it was just really sweet. And actually a good segue into an audience question.
Yeah.
Ashley is asking, both this film and Driveway strongly feature intergenerational relationships. Can you talk about why this theme is important for you to explore?
Yeah, I think I think it's something that I've just been thinking about a lot as I've gotten older. I think especially kind of in your teens, early 20s, like you're so kind of self-absorbed, and you kind of need to be like, that is like an important phase of your life. You have to be focused on yourself, but kind of coming out of that phase of my life, I think a lot about my parents, and I think a lot about my grandparents, and so much uh, I gained so much kind of context about my own life and my own choices, just by getting to know them better. And so I think that that's just something that like I just like can't imagine, like there's something about, like, I just can't imagine, me like leaving my home country to go to another country so that I can start a family and, have to learn a new language. Like, those things to me sound insane. And so the fact that my parents did that, like, to me is just like something that I kind of need to explore in the confusion. It's like I need to explore it in order to understand it better. And so that's something that I really wanted to figure out with Spa Night. As I mentioned before, that first draft of Spa Night, it was just David going into the spa, like, observing, hooking up, and then leaving. But in kind of understanding like what stories I'm interested in, what story I wanted to tell, in this film, it really involved the parents. And so the parents became a bigger and bigger and bigger part of this film, in the development process, in the writing process, and then in the shooting and in the edit.
We have a question from JG. The actors playing David and his family have such a wonderful familial bond and dynamic. How did you cast them?
Yeah, so we looked for David first, and Josa, he was just so obviously the right one. He came in, and I was looking for this quality in that character that I feel like I can only like describe in Korean. It's just like someone who's like really 착해, which is just like a good person, like a kind person. And so he just emanated that, and so after we cast him, we were really looking to find the right compliments. And I had reached out to a casting director, Julia Kim, and she really helped us, like, find this cast. And we decided to look for actors in Korea because we were having a hard time in the States, finding these parent characters. And so we cast in the role of the mom, Harry Kim, and the role of the dad, Yoon Ho Cho. And my cinematographer had worked with the actor that played the dad, Yoon Ho, in a short film, and he just had this kind of very physical, like, presence that I thought was so compelling and really heartbreaking. And then Harry Kim, just so much kind of sensitivity. She felt like a mother that like saw and felt everything. The really scary thing was that the actors met for the first time on set. We didn't have a rehearsal period. Like, we flew Harry and Yoon-ho in, like, actually, like, while we were shooting, we shot all the kind of David alone stuff first, and then the parents came in the second week. And I think it's a real credit to who they are as people, that they care about each other, and I think it really helped that, like, Joe as a person, you just, like, want to take care of him. and so Harry and it just kind of naturally happened. Like, they really, like, felt like, kind of parental, and so that dynamic just kind of really clicked into place and worked out really well.
Question from Derek. What other films of the quote unquote gay canon influenced you, and where do you see Spa Night placed within this genre amongst Asian American films?
That's like a really huge question, because there's, like, gay canon, and then there's Asian American films, and then you do have the films, but it's not necessarily a whole lot. One of my like, favorite films, and a film that really stuck with me for years is Ang Lee's The Wedding Banquet. And I remember my mom wanted to rent that movie, because she had heard that this is a movie about Asian people that white people are watching, like, let's see what it's about. And then she rented it, and then we watched it at home. But she didn't realize that it was a gay film. And here I was, this, like, 8-year-old nascent gay boy, like, watching this movie, being like, holy moly, like, this is, like, insane. And I just remember that movie so well. And it really, it was the first time I had seen like, Asian American gay character. Like, I think it was it was really I think very formative for me. You know, it's so tough to say, where Spa Night fits in the Asian American kind of, like, cinematic canon. And it's definitely, it's definitely not the first. I think there are so many films that people kind of forget, or don't want to acknowledge, for various reasons. And they might be hard to find. But I just remember when I got into Sundance with Spa Night, I was really, like, I was preparing myself for questions about, like, Asian American canon, and so I watched, like, all these Asian American films that Sundance had screened before, you know, and I'd watched The Motel, I watched, you know, Soul Searching, Advantageous, like Better Luck Tomorrow, like, you know, I wanted to see like, oh, like what are these movies? And then when I got to Sundance, like no one asked me about it. I was a little bit disappointed in some ways. And then of course, like right after Spa Night, there's been this kind of resurgence, like, you know, excitement for Asian American stories. And you see it with, you know, Gook, with Columbus, The Farewell, you know, Crazy Rich Asians. You know, people are excited about it in a new way. It's really, you know, for me, I hope that it's not just a fad, right? That it's not just something that like people feel like, oh, it's you know, it's hot right now. But that that it's sustainable, and so for me, some of this does mean like having to find a value in this work outside of kind of box office numbers. And you know, it's like, oh, it's doing well in the box office, or it got sold for this huge amount, like that means we should keep putting money into it. Because if you define success just by how much money something's making or how much money was spent on something, you know, you're not really going to be prioritizing, you know, the storytelling, and the characters, and the community. And so, you know, I'm kind of, in some ways I'm really glad that like Spa Night happened before that, because, you know, it was really, you know, defining and kind of like how I want to continue making work.
Question from Matt Start Something. Andrew, how do you overcome revisiting work that is personal or autobiographical, notably if you've moved outside of the mindset from when you first conceived it? Is it difficult to not judge yourself?
That's a good question. I mean, maybe it's a little bit my like life philosophy, but you know, in some ways, the more distance I have from something, I actually feel like I judge myself less. You know, like I can kind of understand the context of, um, you know, like why I made those choices at that time. Um, and so for me, I think time is only, you know, kind of a good thing. Um, but you know, I think I will say that like, um, you know, a film like Spawn, I felt like I don't know if I could make that film again. And I think if I tried to, it might not be, you know, it might not be as good, or it might not be as raw as it is, you know. Um, and so I think it's a really important thing when you're doing something that's autobiographical, in some way, that you know, you have to have enough distance from it that it's not too hot, and that you don't like re-traumatize yourself, or you know, lose objectivity, because it's still a craft. You know, you still have to make this film. um but that it also like is not so distant that like it feels like, oh, this is a film I should have made, you know, when I was younger. You know, a younger self should have made it. And so there's a little bit of a sweet spot, and I think I found that with Spa Night, and that's something that, you know, I continue to think about as I grow, you know, in my career, and as I just grow in age. You know, just like when should I make these films? And I think a lot of that is just understanding yourself as an artist, and figuring out like, you know, what am I interested in, you know, as opposed to what are other people telling me I should be interested in, or you know, what the industry is telling me I should work on.
And so that's a good segue into your recent feature, Driveways. And I was wondering if you could tease a little bit about it. And there was a question from Austin about the theatrical and release plans for it, and if you have any future plans for a third feature. Let him chill for a second.
Yeah. Yeah, so I made a film called Driveways that I directed, but I didn't write. It was written by two writers, Hannah Boss and Paul Thurine, who um, are super talented and like wrote this script. And it was the first script that I had read, like after I found an agent and, was trying to figure out my next project. It was the first script I read, after making Spa Night that I just like thought was great, like I just thought it was so beautiful and had this quality to it that I really look for in work, which is that the drama in Driveways is kind of it springs out of love for each character as opposed to anybody hating another character. And so, I made that film, and it was a really interesting process for me because, it wasn't something that I had written, but in some ways, that kind of felt appropriate. So the story about Driveways is that it's about a young mother and her son who come to this small town because the mother has inherited a house from her estranged sister who's passed away. And when they get there, they're going to try and clean out the house and sell it, but they find out that she was a hoarder. So this trip that was going to take maybe just a couple of days ends up, taking a couple of weeks, and they're not so welcome by the neighborhood, and the one person that is sympathetic to them is this next door neighbor who's a Korean War veteran who's kind of coming to terms with his own mortality. So that film, in some ways, it's like so different from Spa Night, the kind of trappings of it, but there's this real similarity to me in the kind of the heart of the film and its respect for its characters and its observational quality. And I think it's a real testament to my producer, Joe Piro, to see Spa Night and then feel like it's that director is the right director to make a movie like Driveways. But yeah, we had a really great festival run. We premiered in Berlin and we screened at Tribeca, and we were nominated for 2 Spirit Awards, Hong Chow, Best Female Lead, and then my writers, Hannah and Paul, for Best First Screenplay. And we were really excited about continuing, screenings in the spring, doing special engagement, theatrical screenings. Unfortunately, because of what's happening, it just made sense to continue with our digital release date, which is May 7th. And so it'll be available on Apple TV, Amazon Prime, Google Play, and Microsoft Movies. And I think there's just something about the film that I think will really resonate with people in this time, because I think it's a really generous movie and like is there to kind of fill your spirit as opposed to like drain it, which I think is a thing that certain filmmakers and certain films do. And I think that there's a time and a place for it. You may not want to see it now. I totally watched Contagion the other week because I wanted that, but I think Driveways, I think, will really resonate for people. In terms of third feature, I've definitely been working really hard on a couple of different projects, and I think the commonality in all my work so far, and that I want to continue, is that that it does add to this Asian American cinema culture, and that Asian American characters are interesting to me, especially because as there are more representations, that I definitely want to like show that these representations can be queer, that they can be like different from what you may expect, right? And that our communities like hold so much story. It doesn't make sense to me not to tap into that and to want to articulate that in this art form. So I've got a couple of projects that are Asian American, some that are specifically Korean American, some that are gay, some that aren't. But I think, it's just something for me that, I'll continue to look for, both kind of within myself, and then also just like, reading scripts, reading books, reading short stories and articles.
And we're just about wrapping up here, but I did have one final question slash departing thought. We were just talking about this before we hopped on, but in this time of uncertainty and navigating what might be a long stretch of time, and this question is for, I think, just as much both of us as viewers that we have who are creatives, who are filmmakers, and maybe wondering how they should be using their time now. What is something that you're doing to ground yourself, either personally or creatively, as you are developing these projects? What is sort of your daily routine as you're kind of unfolding with time?
Yeah, it's really it's been such an adjustment. I think my daily rhythms have really kind of reverted in some ways to like a very like personal form, where I'm a night owl, and I just have become even more of a night owl, and it's really hard for me to fall asleep before 3:30 in the morning, which isn't necessarily like a great thing, but I was told by my life coach that I shouldn't punish myself for that. But yeah, I think for me, this is what I love about what we're doing, and what BAM has really committed yourselves to, in just continuing to build community, right? That like, if we can't gather in person, how can we continue to connect with each other? And so I'm very thankful for BAM, and the fact that you wanted to do something like this. And so I'm just trying to like continue finding ways to stay connected with people, whether that's like appropriately social distance walk, or Zoom chats, or doing things like this. And so that's kind of my I think it's my saving grace. I also I'm totally like a knitter, and I've been knitting a lot, and I've been making this beanie. So it's just, you do what you need to do in order to stay, just like feeling emotionally healthy. The other thing that I'll say is, I think there's a lot of pressure for people. They feel like, oh, I need to be productive in this time. And I think that, yes, like we totally can be, but we can also like, we're also like, this is very anxiety inducing, and we don't need to put that pressure on ourselves. And so I really think it's about kind of really listening to your body, and listening to your your inner dialogue, and just like feeling like, okay, like what do I really like need and want today. And so I think in many ways I'm just trying to be as present as possible.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure it'll resonate with a lot of us. It surely does for me. But yeah, thank you again for joining us and for being up for this virtual chat. This is very much new, and I'm so glad that we were able to spend time with everyone. So we're sending strength and health to everybody watching, and please make sure to tune in for future Q&As that we'll be doing this week. Tomorrow we have one following a screening of Baccarat with the filmmakers and Udo Kier, and as well as a few more coming down the line. So thanks again, and see you soon. Bye.
Bye.